for some questions. So, like Andrew said, my name is Sarah Bargo. I work here at OTC. And for me, I have kind of always been somewhat politically active because I was raised that way. So I grew up in a family where politics and current events were discussed at the dinner table. So it wasn't necessarily that my parents were political activists per se, but it's just that they were informed and they made sure that me and my brother were informed as well. So most of my life was spent just kind of knowing what was going on, showing up to the polls and voting. My mom is a big women's rights and reproductive rights fan, and so occasionally I would accompany her to a rally, like I went to the Obama one. That was great. And I've been to a couple of other reproductive rights events. And so that was kind of the extent of it for me. I was just kind of a participant in democracy. So then in 2016, Mr. Trump was elected president, and for me and a lot of folks like me, it was terrifying. So I felt like, okay, maybe I need to do something to get a little bit more involved. Wasn't sure exactly where to start, what my options were. If one person could make a difference, I didn't really know any of that stuff. So I accompanied my mom to the Women's March in St. Louis, the weekend of his inauguration. And that was the turning point for me. That was probably one of the most compelling days of my entire life. So just to be surrounded by 20,000 women who feel like you do, think like you do, it was just super, super empowering. So that was kind of the moment where I was like, I'm not going to be a participant anymore. I want to step into another role. I want to take the next step, get into a leadership position, see what I can do instead of just bitching about things, like try to actually do something, So the first step for me was to go to a Springfield Indivisible meeting. And so for those of you that may not know, Indivisible is a national kind of organization that sprang up as a result of the election, basically a group of concerned citizens. And so there is a Springfield chapter, and so I decided to go to their first meeting, and that's actually where I met Hannah. We had both kind of signed up to work on the PR committee. So we had our first meeting, and it was me and her and two other folks, and Hannah and I have gotten to do lots of incredible things ever since. So shortly thereafter, I actually didn't end up staying on that committee because the Science March happened. So for any of you that are unfamiliar, the Science March happened on Earth Day 2017. It kind of sprang up as a result of two things: the success of the Women's March, and then a result of what the administration was doing to the environment, or proposing to do to the environment, some of the things that they had talked about and suggested doing with the EPA. I have a degree in anthropology, so my world is kind of based on empirical evidence, and so to me that was really alarming. So me and another gentleman that I know, we decided to throw together a Science March here in Springfield. So that was really my first big jump into stepping out of being a participant and stepping into being a leader in something. So we spent a couple of months organizing that, and it was fantastic, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. It was a ton of work, but I was new to it all, so just kind of learning as I go. I have a little experience with event planning anyways, based on my job here, so it was kind of a natural fit for me to move into that role. But to kind of just put myself out there and put my name out there, that was a whole new experience for me. But it was wonderful. It was a really good experience. So as a result of being involved with that, I think that's how my name kind of got on the map, I guess, if you want to say, here in Springfield. So shortly after that, I was approached by a couple of women that were beginning a new chapter of the National Organization for Women. And they had invited me to be on their board. So I accepted that, and Hannah did as well. So we both got to work together with the National Organization for Women. I served a year on that board, and we got to do lots of cool stuff. We held some educational events, like on intersectionality, feminism generally. We held voter registration drive. Hannah and I held a Me Too event last January. We held a domestic violence walk and an event down on the square. So we got to get involved with the community, meet a lot of other activists in the Springfield community, and you'd be surprised at how many of them there are here, and there are a ton. So after my term ended there in May, so since May, I've kind of been working on two projects. Right now, I am on the organizing committee for Me Too Springfield. So we have a very large event coming up in October down on the square. And so me and 2 other girls, they're actually college students from SBU, are putting that event together, and we will be, that's kind of our first big event. We've been working on this for a few months, but we're hoping that the organization will continue to grow out of that. So we're already planning events, some sex ed classes for kids actually, to kind of fill the gap that is left by Springfield Public Schools and some other area schools. So we're trying to do some things in the community regarding the Me Too conversation. And I'm also currently doing some volunteer work for Cindy Slimp. She is running in the 134th district for the State House. It's a district that's on the west side of Springfield. Like I said, my mom is a women's rights gal, and of course that's kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. So that's my #1 issue is women's rights and reproductive rights. So for me, working for Cindy, there's just not a lot of women that run for office down here in the Ozarks. So I like to say I'll vote for a man, but I'll work for a woman, and so there's not many women for me to work for, and Cindy is one of them. So I'm kind of putting in some time in to see if we can try to get her elected. So those are the things that led me to this and kind of what I'm up to now.
Okay, so, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Cool, I made notes, so if I'm looking down at my phone, I swear I'm not being rude. Okay, so for me, I grew up always interested in politics. I grew up, though, in like a very far right family, but I grew up like being knowledgeable about politics and being able to like have conversations with people about politics. When I went to college, I kind of like got disengaged until I started an English degree. So I was working on my piano degree for 4 years. When I started on my English degree, I started reading things and watching news again and starting to like understand some issues and the history of the US that I kind of had been unaware of before. So I was reading things about people of color and people who identify as LGBT and women's rights and stuff like that. So I started getting more tapped into the political scene. Then the election happened and I was like, I need to step up my game. I felt a bit guilty for just kind of allowing I alone didn't allow that to happen, obviously, but I decided I wanted to get more involved, and so I started going to protests, and I'll talk more about protests later, but that was a good way for me to like get initially involved because I met a lot of really awesome people through that. So I did that for a while, just going to protests, meeting people, going to like educational trainings and such. Then I was asked to be on the board of the National Organization of Women with Sarah, and so we did a lot of cool work there. I started a breakout group called Team Millennial, which was just a group of about 100 high school and college students who we just focus on making this area a more inclusive area, like a more inclusive space for young women and young people and LGBT folks. And we also did a lot of focus on voter registration and just getting young people politically engaged. So essentially what this group is. And so what else do I have here? That was really important to me. We organized the school walkouts. I don't know if you guys were following that, but every high school in the city actually participated along with, not OTC, but Drury and MSU. So now I work as a campaign staffer for Representative Crystal Quaid, and so for that I just write emails and canvas and write website content and things like that. And so I think one of the things that I just want to share today, that I think is so important when you're starting to get politically engaged, is that there are so many issues and things that you can fight for that I think it's really important to pick which one is most important to you, or 2 or 3 that are most important to you, and figure out the most strategic ways that you can be engaged. Because when I first got involved, I tried to go to everything and do everything, and it's really easy to get burnt out. So I just think it's important to figure out what matters to you the most. So for me, it's getting women elected, it's women's rights, and it's LGBT rights. So there's that. I also do a lot of writing. I'm a freelance journalist, so I like to write about LGBT rights and just kind of the political scene in Missouri, because I think with journalism in general, there's a lot of focus on the coasts and big cities and less of a focus on what's actually happening here in flyover states. So that's one of the things that I try to focus on. Let's see what else. Yeah, so protesting, like I said, that was something that I did a lot of when I first got started, and it's a good way to meet people, but now I think it's really important for me personally to focus on voter registration and working on getting people elected and just making sure that all the actions that we're doing are very action-oriented, and, you know, calling your legislators, going to Jefferson City to talk with your legislators about the issues that matter to you. And so yeah, that's kind of like about the work that I've done. But my number one goal is to help young people realize how directly politics influence your life. And I think as young people, because people in office don't represent what we look like, we often think like it doesn't matter, or that they're not going to represent our needs. So I think that's why it's so important for us to be engaged, make sure people getting elected represent our values, our voices, and those who are most disenfranchised in this country. And I just want young people to know that getting involved in politics is just so important and so crucial, and our voices can really have the power to affect change. So.
You know, I was watching this. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. I know it's entertainment and not government, but it's the same principle. I forget what the name of that girl that used to star on Charmed was. Ended up shaving her head. I think she was married to Marilyn Manson.
Rose McGowan.
Rose McGowan.
Oh,
And she
yeah.
had said recently that she has quit acting because she hates reciting lines for herself that men have written. And to a certain extent, I kind of get that, because if women wrote for me all the time, I'd sound like Mulan. Like, hey guys, how's it going? Like the idea of a woman's idea of what a man is supposed to sound like. But men write laws that govern women. I mean, predominantly women. So I think that's a really important issue. I have a question for both of you. And it concerns something that I've kind of been stuck on for a couple of years now. And it came from the Women's March, so maybe you guys both have a perspective on this. At the Women's March was it the largest protest, peaceful protest in American history? Do you know that?
I want to say besides the March on Washington.
Yeah, the thing is that, you know,
It was very disparate
it was
across
difficult
country.
to tally numbers. So you're gonna find articles that refer to it as the largest, and then you're gonna find other people that say it wasn't, but.
So there's this huge march in Washington, D.C., and largely, I don't know what the percentage was, very high that it was women. And there was a bit of a scuffle among the pro-women protesters that were upset about the president being elected. And the scuffle was, there were pro-life women's groups that were meeting and also rallying with everybody else, and they ran into resistance from the predominantly pro-choice women's groups. What's your general take on that? Does feminism necessitate pro-choice, in your opinion, or can you be pro-life and embrace
My answer is,
the tenets of feminism?
my answer is, I don't think that you can be pro-life and a feminist.
Okay.
Do I need to elaborate?
No,
I know that's probably.
I would appreciate it if you did, because
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with a couple panelists, Dr. Joan Barrett being one of them, and she gave the same answer, but I still can't wrap my head around it. Why, if you believe that women get paid worse than men, should be paid more equal, that's a feminist belief. And God, the 15,000 violence against women, the ex-boyfriend loophole with gun purchases and stuff like these are pro-women policies you can adopt.
For me, I mean,
But
when it
it's
comes down to body autonomy and reproductive freedom, I mean, that is, for me, that is just a basic human right, that women have the right to make their decisions about their bodies and when they want to be parents. I mean, it's really the bedrock of feminism to me. If you can't support women having bodily autonomy, I don't know how that translates into women having the freedom to pursue anything else that they want in life. Hannah, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with Sarah, but at the same time, I don't think it's like a point that we should contend for. If people want to advocate for women, if they want to advocate for equal pay, they want to advocate for ending violence against women, then I'm going to say absolutely stand beside me. Let's do that together. I have people who would disagree. I mean, I know people who would disagree and say, no, like, I don't like to say pro-life either. I like to say pro-birth. But people who are pro-birth,
Pro-forced birth.
right, I would like to stand with them. If they want to stand for women on certain issues, then I don't have a problem standing beside those people.
So I know neither one of you would point at somebody and yell liar, because you're both very, very nice. But like somebody's like, yeah, I'm feminist, but I'm pro-life. Are they lying?
My family is all super conservative, super pro-life, and my sister and mom would call themselves feminists, and I would say, awesome. I hope that you fight for equality for women.
So
I stand beside you.
in your feminism, either one of you can answer this, although I'll start with Sarah. In your feminism, first of all, define feminism for us, to the best of your ability.
It's very simple. It's the equality of the sexes. If you believe in the equality of the sexes, you're a feminist.
One of the things that really blew my mind, because I've been teaching this subject for a long time, is just that's what feminism believes, that women should have the same rights as men, same access to rights as men. That's it.
That's been distorted over the years, yeah.
And then when people say, well, feminism, like the president himself says, I don't want to be, I wouldn't consider myself a feminist.
There are a lot of people that, it's a dirty word.
Right, but if you lay it out, you're like, do you want women to be paid equally? Do you want boyfriends that have criminal records to not have access to guns so that don't you brandish them in domestic fights? They agree with that stuff. Maybe not the pro-choice stuff, but they agree with it. And so it's crazy how easily twisted. God, if I ever hear the phrase feminazi again.
Yeah. But I think it's important to not get caught up. I mean, really, it's just a label. You know, I think it's important to not get caught up in the label. If you don't want to be called a feminist, but you still support those ideals, that's just as good to me. So labeling, I think, is the issue there.
Your feminism, at the top billing of your feminism, is it reproductive rights, or is there another issue or two that you think as or more important?
For me, it's reproductive rights.
You're emperor for a day. That's the one pro-woman policy you can adopt.
Correct, for me, yes.
Same, Hannah, or is there something else that you would maybe pursue instead?
Give me a minute.
Okay.
I want to like lean more towards like ending misogyny against women in all the ways. I just think of like, I don't know if anyone's been following the news this week about Louis C.K., who admitted to masturbating in front of women for 20 years without consent, and within less than a year he has his career back. So for me, it's more like justice for women who have been victims of sexual assault, sexual violence, and men being held accountable for enforcing patriarchal violence.
Anybody else read that story? That story was nuts.
Yeah.
The crazy thing about it isn't that he came back to me, although too soon. I think, in my opinion, the crazy thing is that people that observed the set, they were like, he was just doing normal Louis C.K. material, as if, hey guys, I'm back.
And he can because he can.
It's also important to know that he never actually apologized. If you read that note, it wasn't an apology.
You never had an apology?
No, he never said sorry for my actions. He essentially said sorry that you were offended by what I did. And
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Louis C.K. broke my back because I adore his comedy. I for a long time I identified with it. I had 2 little girls myself, and so all that stuff they talks about how difficult raising kids is, I identify with, and then this stuff comes out. And I think because of how popular he is, he has a tremendous platform that he completely forgot existed, I guess, when he came back. Anyways, so why wouldn't you put women's pay at the top? Women's pay affects every single American in the country.
Well, I think
this day and age, women are more likely to be wage earners. Why wouldn't you put it at the very top?
It's just, for me personally, I mean, it's just not the top for me. I mean, I don't want to say that any of the other women's issues are, severely diminished because I put reproductive rights ahead of the others. But to me, it's just the most important for me, it's just kind of the bedrock of women's personal freedom, is to be able to control our bodies.
Have you looked into women's pay? What's the driver?
Oh, we could have a whole day on this. I mean, there's a lot of research out there. There's a ton of data. It has a lot to do with culture, obviously. It has a lot to do with children, with women being generally speaking, the primary caregivers of children. So that in turn causes a lot of women to have to leave the workforce, which in the eyes of some CEOs and managers diminishes their value. So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of different variables with this. So yeah, I don't know that I could sum that up in one answer because it's a lot to it.
Well, since you two are both connected to now, I was reading research that reflects almost exactly what you said. And it shows right out of college, women and men earn similarly, men earn more. But that
as soon as you throw in kids.
That pay gap explodes when kids are happy, because men can ostensibly keep working and women take time off, and that's when the pay gap explodes. But how do you fix that? I was listening to,
Now, I
Go
want to
ahead.
add in there really quick,
Please
when
do.
you say that men keep working, that's another issue, because men keep working because most places don't give men paternity leave pay.
Right.
And they give it to women, but they don't to men. So if that was more acceptable to give men paternity leave pay, then it may change the conversation a
you
little
could.
bit. But that's not, culturally, that's not where we're at. I mean, we're moving in that direction, that's for sure, but we're nowhere near.
Culturally, other countries do
Yes,
do that.
yes.
Have you observed any research from those?
No, nothing that I could really
Yeah.
to spit off and feel comfortable with my facts.
So I want to get back to you, Sarah, particularly because I understand with Hannah, electing Trump would be a shock to the senses because she's young. You and I have been around for a few administrations. You've been around for another Republican administration. Why was the election of this particular Republican, who's pro-life,
Yeah.
such a different shock to your senses than George W. Bush? At the time you're stressed out on election day. You don't know anything that's happening.
Yeah, at the time it was just a lot of fear because I didn't know what was going to happen. Because in the run up to the election, and you're listening to debates and you're trying to keep informed, and there just seemed to be a lot of disconnect between reality and what was coming out of his mouth, and so I just had a lot of fear because I didn't know. I didn't trust him. It was difficult for me to trust him, so it made me feel very unsafe. It was kind of the first time in my life that I felt unsafe here. But I think most of it just came out of a lack of just the unknown. It was very much the unknown. Whereas, the last Republican president that I was around for was George Bush, and I felt like, we pretty much knew what we were getting. But this, I think that no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, I think that we could all agree that President Trump is a different politician than we've ever seen before. And so that unknown was terrifying to me.
Folks, I would love it if somebody else who might have a comment or a question or anything like that for these individuals, if you would like to volunteer that.
I'll let you
You
call
guys-
on folks.
you guys
Okay, I'll let you go ahead.
So I have a very unpopular opinion and a very unpopular question that I'm kind of nervous to ask, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. Take like Bill Cosby, for example. I don't believe that something that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago is punishable today. Like all of his sexual misconducts with women. Yes, I 100% agree that that's terrible. That should never happen. That should, but I just don't understand why 30 years, decades down the road that came out and that he was convicted of that.
You mean why it took women so long to come forward?
I understand why it
okay.
takes women so long to come forward, because that's something very, very hard to deal with. I guess I don't really understand my own question. It's just I've always kind of disagreed why that happens. A long time down the road. What's your?
I mean, for me, I base my answer to that question on personal experience, and so I will just share. I had an issue happen to me as a child. I was 4 years old, and I actually didn't come out and talk to or address my perpetrator until last year. I'm 39 now.
Right.
So looking at it through that lens, do I think that because that much time passed that he still isn't a monster for molesting a 4-year-old girl? I think he's still a monster no matter how much time has passed. So yeah, I don't know. So just looking at it through that personal lens, to me, it doesn't matter how much time passes.
Yeah.
If you've done a bad thing, you should be held accountable.
Speaking of doing bad things and being accountable, either one of you have a thought or two you'd like to share about the horrific stories you've heard about the Catholic Church in the last couple of weeks? Other than curse words?
I don't know that there's much to say. I mean, I don't think you're gonna find too many dissenting opinions in any room that think that something is right there,
I will say in regards to your question too, though, I think it's important to realize that people rarely just attack or rape or assault one time, and I
Right.
think there's probably an indication that it's a pattern of behavior, and that's definitely the case with Cosby. I mean, there's a statute of limitations, so I don't know what that number of years is,
It's
but
different from state to state.
I
know Missouri, I believe it's 30 years.
You have 10 years from your 18th
Oh, yeah, you
birthday
would
for
know.
child
You would-
sexual abuse, yeah.
10 years from your 18th
And I think
birthday.
it's far less than that for adult assault. It's far less than that. the clock starts ticking.
So it wasn't just one victim.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
in the case of Cosby, I mean, I think there were like 20 in the 20s, and I think it's important to protect future victims.
Just real quick to add on that, I don't remember who said it, so I can't like quote anybody off the top of my head. But one thing that I saw was echoing that. It was like, well, this happened in the past, blah 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 blah. And the female lawyer who responded to the comment said, if we don't prosecute, it sets a precedent that all you have to do is keep oppressing your victims for long enough, and then they will have no. You've already taken away their agency,
Right.
and you're going to keep doing it. And so all you had to do is continue to do it. But one thing that I wanted to bring up real quick, because I don't know if it was like explicitly like put out there, but whenever you're talking about paternity leave, like that is feminism too, and I think that's like such an
Equality of
important
the
thing.
sexes.
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause,
Men
like,
can be feminist, can and
Yeah.
should be feminist too.
exactly. So I just think that that's like I don't know. I think that's an argument that we haven't like brought up enough, because so many of like fragile men are like, well, where am I included in this? And it's like, well, we're fighting for your rights too, you know.
For sure. That's a good point.
You had a couple questions over there.
I think that the paternity leave for men is extremely important because I personally know a lot of single fathers. Like, in any case where like the mother like ran away, or in any case, I know a lot of fathers who are single fathers, but they have to work full time, they have to pay for daycare, and they didn't get any paternity leave. So they had to pay extra money for their newborn to be in daycare because they charge extra if it's a newborn, because that's more work, more time.
And I think also a point that should be made is even when you're not talking about single fathers, when you're talking about a two-parent household, you have to look at paternity leave through the lens of also how that supports the woman.
Yeah.
So it's not just a good thing for father and child, but it's very supportive to the mother who, it's a very difficult thing to have a child and go through, those weeks and months that follow. And so to have someone that's available to give you that support is important.
Well, that's also one of the most important times of a baby, isn't it? Whenever they're
Yeah.
so spending that time being spent with that child, that could make a huge difference of how they are, how they turn out to be whenever they.
I think the
older.
lack of paternity leave just perpetuates this myth that women are caregivers and men go make the money.
Right.
And
There's
it's
actually a
not-
white paper that came out last week, or at least I read about it last week, that said when a man loses his job or his job is in jeopardy, he's between jobs, it causes a family tremendous stress. But when a woman is in the same exact situation, the family just hums along. They're like, it's all right, honey, you can get behind it. It's crazy how it's the same circumstance, which is the psychological factor of gender colors everything. Do you have a comment?
Hunter should go next. He's
Oh.
had his hand up for like 10 minutes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
About the pay gap, I believe in like equal pay and all that, but I've always had like a hard time seeing it in today. I could see it 20, 30 years ago, but today I just don't really see why there is a pay gap. Unless we're going off
I mean, you
by,
don't know that there is one, or you don't
I just
see
can't
why.
see it. Like, I know that there is
We'll print
something
you some
out there.
papers.
Yeah.
I'm not
It's not public. Right.
Is it because of the time differences, or are we talking about a man and a woman that work the exact same hours? Like, no difference whatsoever, there's a pay gap.
The data on the pay gap is
Okay.
exact
So it's
same
not
position,
just-
not just same hours, but same job duties. The
That's-
exact same
okay.
job.
Same qualifications, same job description, same
Same
organization,
experience,
80% less.
Okay.
Sitting in the same room together, 80% less.
I just
Or
didn't-
well,
80%
20%
up.
less,
I was
yeah,
about to say.
yeah.
I just didn't understand
Yeah.
if it was going off of, like, just 1 year of each, same experience and all that, but the woman had been taken off, like, maternity leave and all that. But they, like, same education,
Yeah.
but
All those
different
variables
times,
have been-
if
yes.
that was why there was a pay gap.
Yeah.
But it's because they're doing the same thing, but there is that gap.
There
The
is
higher
that
you
challenge.
get in any organization, if it's
The bigger the
education,
gap.
business, whatever, the higher you get in that tier, the executives, the hiring managers are almost exclusively men. You start to see women fall out of a leadership pipeline. So the farther up you go, you end up hiring people who are very, very similar to you.
Right.
And part of that falling out of the leadership pipeline sometimes has to do with maternity leave, with caring for family, things like that. Executive boards, industry, it's consistent across the board.
So do you think if we gave men paternity leave, that it would somewhat help the situation?
It will. I think it would. I think it could. I mean, there's really no way to know if it would. I think that it could, but I think a lot of the pay discrimination is actually rooted in culture. There's, you know, everywhere you look. I mean, there's cultural differences in men and women are expressed in ways that we don't even really think about until you sit down and force yourself to think about them. So, I mean, just generally speaking, history has shown that men are just generally seen as they're stronger, they're more strategic, they're, you know, I mean, these things that whether that's true or not is a different story, but that's the perception, that women are more emotional and we're weaker, and so therefore we are not capable of doing the big things that men do. So it's more, I mean, I think paternity leave, it could be one small component of the issue, but I think there are a lot of
it's
components.
gonna be
Right.
like an immediate fix.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if that might help, because then.
I think it could. I think it could help.
And one last thing, I'm sorry, Lexi.
It's okay.
Well, and she's had her hand up for a
Yeah,
long
Yeah,
time.
Let's
We
go to
got 2
Celeste. Go
minutes.
ahead.
Yeah,
Celeste.
So I can guarantee this is going to be very unpopular,
it's okay.
but so you place women's reproductive rights at the very top of your list.
I do.
I am very much pro-life because I stand before you as an example of a baby who should have been aborted.
Mhm.
I should have been. My mom was 42 when she had me. I was her first child. She'd never even been pregnant before. They had adopted 2 kids before me because they just didn't get pregnant for 25 years. 42, my mom got pregnant. I should have been born premature, should have had Down syndrome, something. I should have had, my brain should have been fully developed. There should have been something wrong with me. Instead, I have an above average IQ, and I'm well on my way to becoming, you know, as my mom puts it, a wildly successful journalist. I don't know, but I should have been aborted. There was like a 70% chance I would have been born with Down syndrome, and a very severe case of it.
When you
Yeah.
say you should have been aborted,
Doctors advised my
Are you-
mom to.
right? Did your mom at some point say, "I want to do this"?
No,
but then
she
was-
never wanted to because my mom is also very pro-life.
Well, I mean, then I say like awesome for her that she had that choice, that she made the choice that she did. Like, but I think a lot of pro-choice advocates aren't advocating for more abortion, they're just advocating that women should
Right,
have the
right.
choice to
Yeah.
decide.
But the problem is, it should not be my mom's decision to whether or not she's gonna have a kid. See, I don't care what people say about the baby's just a fetus or whatever for like the first 4 months. I'm a Christian, okay? God created humans in the image of Him.
And I don't know that this is the forum to debate abortion or anything like that. And I respect your opinion, and that's great. This is America. Mine was just different. So that's all.
Any final thoughts? Did you, Hunter, Lexi, did you want to add one more thought?
She was
If you
talking
could make it
about
relatively swift.
She was talking about the culture of how we're basically saying that men are strong and men are this and men are that. I feel like that's really feeding into like our toxic masculinity problem because
What
men.
is toxic masculinity?
Oh,
It-
Hannah,
Yeah,
you
Hannah
can
knows it.
explain this.
Oh my
You're being toxic.
Because I want to know if I'm being toxic.
It's basically just.
Good, yeah, take it
it's
away.
like men want to put off this persona of I am a strong man, I don't need blah blah blah, I don't have emotions, I'm not a crybaby, but it's making them more mentally unstable. They don't know how to like cope with their emotions, they don't know how to like process and deal with them, so it just makes them angry
And there's much of our culture that says men do not cry, men do not show
Yeah, and
emotion,
that's so
men do
wrong.
not show caring. Yeah, and
That's
all
so
of that
wrong.
stuff is really detrimental to the men.
Yeah.
See, but I also think it's where you were raised from, because I was always taught to show my emotions, to show your
And that's
feelings.
good.
You know, I think that a big part is how we were raised, and I think here in the next decade or century, we're gonna see a big change in that, because
God, I
people
hope
like
so.
us are starting to become more aware of that type of stuff, you know?
I hope so. I read an article yesterday and it just broke my heart. There was a 9-year-old little boy in grade school, and he came out and said that he was homosexual, and his entire school bullied him until he committed suicide.
I've seen that, yeah.
That's a 9-year-old little boy.
Yeah.
So like, I really hope that our youth is like being taught better because.
Well, kids are always gonna be mean at the same
Yeah.
time.
Well, you know,
Kids are mean.
I hate to go out on grade school suicide. But what kind of group would we be if we didn't end on a happy note? So, first of all, if I could take 30 seconds with Hannah, and then we will all shut up. 30 seconds with Hannah. I just read a poll, 55% of young voters are excited to vote in November. That's exciting compared to previous years, but still 1 out of every 2. How do we get that to 99%?
Oh, if I knew that answer,
Yeah.
I would be so.
I was hoping you had a golden ticket or something. All right, go ahead, if you have anything you'd like to add.
I don't. I mean, I just think it's important that we realize how important how we realize like it's so important that we have legislators that look like us and who are voting for us and representing our voices. And I think once young people realize that, then they're more likely to vote. But I just don't think we've had a lot of good options, especially in 2016.
Hannah Brashers, Sarah Bargo, I sought you both out specifically to be our first speakers. You guys did awesome. Thank you so much.
First, I just want to say, if any of you are interested in getting active politically, maybe want to help a candidate for the November election, feel free to reach out to Andrew or Kara or me or Hannah. We can definitely kind of show you the ropes and hook you up with different people and campaigns that might be of interest to you.
Okay, guys, you are